You know, when I got back into video game collecting, one of the first things I bought was this guy right here, my Kiwi Game Boy Color. Now, this was my ride or die from like 1999 to 2003. This was my everything. This is like the only console I used. I carried it with me everywhere. It went to work with me. It was my favorite thing. I got to play tons of Pokemon games on it. All my Pokemon Yellow, Pokemon Blue. I played Pokemon Crystal on here. This was my everything, and it traveled with me. And I've realized that over the last few years, I'm playing still a lot of Game Boy Color games. And being that it is 2024 and that handheld gaming, I think, is something that might see a bit of a resurgence coming forward. There's rumors of the new PlayStation handheld console. Obviously, the Switch is still a fantastic piece of machinery. The Steam Deck, ROG Ally, stuff like that. There's always an option for excellent handheld gaming. Handheld? Handheld, not hamheld. Handheld is something else entirely. That usually happens at Easter. But today we're looking back at the Game Boy Color, one of my favorite consoles of all time. And we are talking about 10 games that I am still going back to in 2024. All right, I'm going to be honest with you. This one is absolutely cheating because I've never played this on original hardware. I've never played the original version of Kirby Tilt and Tumble. I've only played the release on the Nintendo Switch, which, in my defense, is absolutely brilliant because it works wonderfully well with the motion controls inherent to the system's design. But I've never played the original release, so I don't know how great it is on the Game Boy Color, and I can't really say I'd go back to my Game Boy Color when I've never owned it and never played it on original hardware. But I wanted to call it out because it is such a fantastic game. If you haven't played it and you're not familiar with some of the things that I really love, I am a huge fan of weird games that make use of things like accelerometers or solar panels like Boktai did, and Kirby Tilt and Tumble absolutely uses an accelerometer for motion control features. It's a brilliant game. It's a lot of fun. If you haven't played this one, and if you don't have a Game Boy Color to play it on, check out the release for the Nintendo Switch online service. It's fantastic. All right, now this one, while I don't technically own the cartridge, well, there's nothing technical about it. I really don't own the cartridge because I'm not paying with a kidney to get a game. But while I don't have the original cartridge, I have played this game on original hardware, and this, of course, is the original Shantae, which is the starting game from one of my favorite independent video game series of all time. You play as the half-genie herself, Shantae. Risky Boots attacks your town, and you have to track her down and defeat her in order to win the game. It's a fantastic introduction to a brilliant series. Now, I will tell you, it is the worst in the series by a long shot. Like, everything else just really excels past it. But it is a fun game, and it does a lot of things really well. And there's a lot of place setting done by this game, and a lot of heavy lifting done by this game that is picked up and just run with in future iterations of the franchise. It's a really interesting title. It's a really good kind of landmark for what can be done by an independent developer when they're given time and given support by a third-party publisher to release a game of a high quality. Now, WayForward has gone on to be one of the most important independent developers out there today, but it all started here with Shantae. This is a brilliant game. It's absolutely fantastic. It's great to emulate. It plays perfectly well compared to the original hardware. There's also releases on modern consoles as well if you want to get it digitally that way. And like me, you don't want to lose an organ in order to own this game. Okay, this one might make some folks mad, but you know what? I don't mind, because facts are facts. Bionic Commando Elite Forces is a better game than the original Bionic Commando, and I don't care what anyone says. And I say that as someone who really enjoys the original Bionic Commando despite all of its inherent flaws. So let's look at what Bionic Commando Elite Forces does better than Bionic Commando. First off, the sprites in the game are massive. They're so much bigger than what you would see on the NES. They look better, the animation sequences are better, the music is better, the combat is a little bit stronger, and yeah, you still can't jump, but the movement in the game works. It just works better to me. The level traversal is fantastic. There's also some really cool like sniper rifle levels that you get to go to, which I think is just fascinating for a Game Boy Color game. Like, what a great idea. What an ambitious take to make your game that memorable by sticking in essentially kind of a first-person shooter mode on a Game Boy Color. It's pretty cool. You also get to play as both a male or a female commando. You get to choose at the start of the game, and I think that's great. I just really like this one. I think it's a spectacular title, and I do like this one better than the original Bionic Commando. I think it's probably fair to say, and I think it's probably well understood at this point, that I have some interesting collecting habits when I'm looking for games, because one of my white whales for Game Boy Color collecting was the Flintstones, Burger Time, and Bedrock. And that is strictly because of such a bizarre concept existing out there in the world. Like, this feels like a fever dream that someone came up with that just happened to be birthed and created on a cartridge. And I'm telling you folks, it works. It's one of the best Burger Time games ever released. Is it perfect? No. It's a little bit slower than it probably needs to be, but Burger Time was also a little bit slow. Is the gameplay perfect? No. It's Burger Time. It's hard. It's not a great experience overall a lot of times, but I still enjoy it. You get to play as Fred, you get to club enemies over the head, you knock down some burgers, and you're on your way back to the gravel pit to get to work and see Wilma and Betty and Barney and Pebbles and Bam Bam and Dino. I love it. It's ridiculous, it's dumb, but for me, this is like such a wonderful experience and something I have so much fun with that I was so happy to add this to my collection last year. I picked this up at the Pittsburgh Gaming Expo, which is coming up in October, and if you're able to go, you should. I wish I could attend this year, but I have a work event happening at the same time, so I'm going to have to skip it this year, but definitely a great show and absolutely worth going to. Now, this could easily be Oracle of Ages or Oracle of Seasons. I just happen to have footage of Oracle of Seasons here, and both games are magnificent. They're fantastic Legend of Zelda original titles from both Nintendo and Capcom that do some really ambitious stuff. The plots of the games are fun, the graphic design in the game is excellent, the combat is wonderful, it's a signature Zelda experience. Like, I'm not going to waste a ton of time on this because it is Zelda and everyone knows it, so just play it. Play both of them, they're fantastic. A second entry from Way Forward on this list, and how this is the only WWF or WWE beat-em-up game we've ever gotten astonishes me. It's ridiculous that this is the only one. And maybe it's because they broke the mold when they did this one because they couldn't improve upon perfection, but WWF Betrayal is legitimate brilliance. It's so much fun. You get to play as Stone Cold, The Rock, or Triple H. You're walking around backstage beating the crap out of referees and Vince McMahon. Back in the early 2000s, it was unheard of to see something like this. And I can't believe, legitimately can't believe that this didn't spawn more games like this. Like, we sure as hell got all kinds of random SmackDown versus Raw or 2K games, but we haven't gotten any other beat-em-ups featuring WWF characters. And frankly, that's kind of astonishing to me. When you have ECW under your banner for so many years and you do nothing with it, that would have been a perfect beat 'em up. All of the weapons you could have used just from the ECW wrestlers. Ridiculous. Such a fun game though. I didn't talk about it at all. It's fun. It's really fun. The gameplay is super fun and you should absolutely play WWF Betrayal. Now, you can go with any version of Mario Tennis and you're going to have a good time, but the original on the Game Boy Color, I think, is the best one that Camelot has made. First off, it's got the role-playing game feature, which I think is brilliant, and that's not in the N64 version, and you're able to bring your character from the GBC version into the N64 version by using the transfer pack. It's great. Just flat out, it's a fun game just based on how well made it is. It's a brilliant tennis game, and I never would have thought the guys that do Shining Force would have been great at making Mario sports games, but here we are. They do. They do great work. It's a really excellent title with some fantastic gameplay. The tennis physics and the tennis gameplay in the game are just spectacular. Some of the best I've ever played. It's a brilliant title and just a ton of fun. Mario sports were at their absolute best in the early 2000s. I know a lot of folks don't like this version of Crystallis as much as they do the NES release, but I just kind of found it awesome that I was able to get what was essentially an NES game on my Game Boy Color to be able to play it, and an NES game that I love. Now, there's definitely differences between the NES release and what was released on the Game Boy Color. There's some plotline differences. Combat's a little bit different, not completely, but just a slight bit. And there's a few other changes as well that some folks just didn't receive terribly well, but for me, I have fun with it. And I tend to agree with John Riggs that this is a better Zelda than Zelda. I think SNK made probably the best action RPG on the NES. I think it's a magnificent game. I think there's some really cool plot points, and I think there's some really awesome combat in here as well, like being able to increase the strength of your attack by letting your force build up or just wailing away on the button and doing a bunch of small damage. I found that incredibly clever, and I found it very appealing when I was younger, and I still enjoy it to this day. I really like Crystallis. Maybe I'm just predisposed to liking SNK stuff. Maybe that's what it is. But have you played this game? Have you played this either on the NES or on the Game Boy Color? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts on Crystallis are. Sergeant Rock on the Frontline makes the list primarily because it's such a strange character to feature in a video game from DC Comics. Now, Sergeant Rock has been around for decades. I think he debuted back in the late 50s or early 60s. To have him featured in a game on the Game Boy Color just didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, so when I initially saw it, my mind was kind of blown. Is this a perfect game? No, but it's a fairly competent Commando clone that plays really well and is really unique, like I said, in terms of actually using what by today's standards is probably a Q-list DC Comics character and puts him front and center in a Game Boy Color game. It's a run-and-gun game, like I said, like Commando, but the play is really good. Graphics aren't spectacular, and the sound isn't necessarily perfect, but I'm not really playing it for that. I'm just doing this to enjoy a game featuring a character that I happen to love. It's not something I go back to constantly, but it is something that every once in a while it's nice to just pop in something where you can shut your mind off and enjoy a really fun run-and-gun game starring a classic comic character. Sergeant Rock on the Frontline is a pretty cool title, and to have something starring this obscure character makes me happy. I loved the original Motocross Maniacs on the Game Boy. I love Motocross Maniacs 2 on the Game Boy Color. I think it's so much fun. It's such a simple and easy to understand and easy to enjoy game. You have a motorcycle, you have crazy loops, you have nitrous that you're able to pick up, you're able to get boosts, and you're able to launch yourself. That's all you really need to know. There's some neat physics in play where you actually have to make sure you land your jumps correctly so you don't crash and wreck out. You have to watch your gas meter to make sure that you're able to keep the bike running and be able to make it through your entire race. It's just a ton of fun. It's one of the signature memories I have of both the original Game Boy and the Game Boy Color is being able to play these, by today's standards, incredibly basic, but just brilliantly designed and super fun racing games. I just loved them. I loved both of the Motocross Maniacs games that released on the original 2 Game Boys, and yeah, just have so much fun going back to it because it's just a simple, easy, fun game to play. I loved Aladdin on both the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. The Genesis version is better, don't come at me. But I wasn't really sure what to expect of it from the Game Boy Color because, let's face it, there's less buttons, graphically it's not as good, and it just couldn't live up to it, right? There's no way that this game was going to be as good as those 16-bit releases. But I'm telling you, Aladdin on the GBC is magnificent. Is it as full-featured as the ones on the Super Nintendo and the Genesis? No, it's not, but it also doesn't lack in any real way. It still plays brilliantly well. Everything that is signature for those 16-bit releases is present here. You have the acrobatics, you have the great stage design, you have very similar combat mechanics to what you would experience on a 16-bit console. It's just, pocket-sized and able to be carried with you. But it is a lot of fun, and if you have a love of the Aladdin games like I do, or you just love that classic Disney 16-bit generation of gaming, you should probably check this one out. I really do like this one. I think it's a lot of fun, and definitely worth checking out. And like I said, definitely worth looking into if you are a fan of the original games. Let's head over to the Johto region and check out Pokemon Crystal. Now, I am an old-school Pokemon fan. I started on Gen 1. I had Pokemon Blue, I had Pokemon Yellow, I had Pokemon Gold, and I had Pokemon Crystal. And this one was just something I absolutely loved. I had so much fun playing with it. And I loved the amazing, just new Pokemon. That kind of blew my mind. Logically now I look at it and I go, they're just going to add new Pokemon. That's all they're going to do. But when they made this Gen 2 release, when they got into the Gold, Silver, and Crystal releases and they added the new Pokemon, my mind was absolutely blown. The legendary Pokemon were incredible. The new starters were great. The gameplay was classic, fantastic, and fun. It's a great, basic, introductory Fisher-Price's My First JRPG. It's a wonderful game. I love it. And God, I love the cartridge design too. That translucent plastic is just brilliant. It's so much fun. If you haven't played this one, if you haven't played this Gold or Silver, I urge you to do so. Maybe see if you can find Heart Gold or Soul Silver for a halfway decent price on the DS, but otherwise, check this one out because it's fantastic. There you have it, my friends, 10 games on the Game Boy Color that I am still playing in 2024. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about these games. Let me know if there's any that you think I have overlooked. Let me know if there's any you think I should be playing. Now, these are GBC exclusive games. There are definitely games that were enhanced for the Game Boy Color or did look good on the Game Boy Color from the classic Game Boy, but we're talking specifically
Game Boy Color releases. If you enjoyed today's video, hey, thank you, that's awesome. Why don't you click that like button down below? And if you made it to the end of the video, that is super cool as well. You enjoyed it enough, why don't you click that subscribe button and stick around. Until next time, folks, I've been Jay. Appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me. Remember to play more games, stay square, and take care. I'll talk to you soon.